What does mediumship mean to people of the 21st century? Many years have passed since 1848, when the Fox sisters heard the spirit rappings in their home, and when Andrew Jackson, considered by many to be the father of American modern spiritualism, wrote while in trance, "Brother, the good work has begun. Behold, a living demonstration is born." Since then, our world has changed in endless ways, including technology, governments, religion, transportation, communication, science, cosmic awareness, medicine, etc. Consequently, so has our understanding of after-death communications, otherwise known as ADCs, i.e. mediumship. Perhaps even to the point where the term mediumship is now a household word. Therefore, I would like to begin with the definition of mediumship as offered by the Nationalist Spiritualist Association of Churches, NSAC. After that, we will look at a more science-oriented description, something that I feel is more appropriate for the 21st century. Then towards the end of this talk, we will discuss some of the latest and exciting research happening in the area of parapsychology as it relates to mediumship. The NSAC, which was founded in Chicago in 1893, adopted the definition of mediumship as follows. A medium is one whose organism is sensitive to the vibrations from the spirit world, and through whose instrumentality, intelligence in that world, are able to convey messages and produce the phenomena of spiritualism. Arguably, this definition could be described as poetic, and certainly its writing style reflects an earlier time period. Therefore, I wondered, how did the NSAC arrive at this definition? Was it written by a single person or by a group of people during a conference? After several internet searches and a few phone calls to spiritualist friends, I was told that the definition was obtained during a trance session or some other form of mediumship. In addition, according to the Morris Pratt Institute, the definition was adopted by the NSAC either in 1914 or 1951. Exactly which of these 2 years it was indeed adopted is unclear. These sites were cited next to several NSAC definitions, all grouped together and without date distinction. To date, I have not been able to locate who exactly was the medium who delivered this spirit message, exactly when it was received, and did it occur during a seance or a meeting, and so on. Now, dates, places, pieces, people, methodologies, all of these things do indeed count. The world in 1914 was very different from the world in 1951. There had been 2 world wars, the splitting of the atoms, penicillin was discovered, and that saved many lives and therefore may have influenced people's ideas about death and the afterlife. Television was invented, air travel became more feasible, and telephone use increased. Now, the word zeitgeist of a time period is that time period's defining quality. It influences our thinking and sense of reality. The zeitgeist of 1914 would have been very different from the zeitgeist of 1951, therefore probably affecting the definition of mediumship. I intend to continue to search for more information on the original definition, as I think it will provide a greater perspective on the phenomena of spiritualism. Now, getting back to the NSAC's definition of a medium, they use the word organism to refer to a medium's physical body. Now, I don't know about you, but unless I'm watching a science fiction movie with earthlings and aliens communicating, using the word organism to refer to the human body sounds a bit campy. The term, whose instrumentality, refers to how mediums communicate with spirit. In other words, instrumentality is a medium's use of clairvoyance, clairaudience, telepathy, etc., to communicate with the other worlds. I suspect that many people would be confused with the phrase whose instrumentality. They might wonder if this refers to human beings or musical instruments. Now let's go on to the phrase intelligence in that world. Do we really want to call a belated loved one an intelligence in that world? Perhaps something like loved one, daughter, or spouse would be warmer and more comforting. In addition, the term that world, what is meant by that world? Another country, planet, galaxy, or universe? A world that is non-material? Heaven? Another dimension? Considering all the popular books, papers, and documentaries published on string theory and multi-universes, and even without getting into extraterrestrial communications, the term that world could probably be a bit more specific for today's more cosmically aware people. To be fair, it is true that most spiritualists and mediums are entirely comfortable with the NSAC definition. It is accurate, and it has withstood the test of time. And its earlier writing style may be comforting to many. Make no mistake, I do not wish to discard this definition. Nonetheless, I suspect that Jane or Joe Public might find it strange sounding. After all, today's population is very different than it was in the first half of the 20th century. We are more diverse ethnically, racially, religiously, and spiritually. We are more educated, including in the area of science. Our present technology includes speed trains, cars, microwave ovens, jets that fly across the globe, and we live longer. Medical technology can see inside people's bodies through X-rays, CAT scans, MRIs, and ultrasounds. We use cell phones to talk with people literally halfway around the planet. In fact, through products like Zoom, MyMeeting, AirMeet, etc., we can even see and talk with people halfway around the planet. The world has changed so much since the NSAC first defined mediumship that we now have a completely different sense of reality. We are, in many ways, much more cosmically aware. There are available newer and more modern definitions of mediumship from various organizations that take mediumship just as seriously as do spiritualists. Such organizations offer novel understanding of mediumship through research projects, experiments, and studies. This is especially true in parapsychology during the last 10 to 20 years. Here we find that evidence for life after death has dramatically increased and is continuing to do so. The following is a scientific description of mediumship published in 2020 by a group of parapsychologists. Throughout history and across cultures, some individuals have claimed the ability to access accurate information by non-conventional means or beyond the physical senses. Individuals who are allegedly able to access accurate information about deceased individuals are often called mediums. Note that this is a working description of mediumship and it's not a definition. Included in this description is the statement that mediums are capable of sensing and perceiving accurate information from the deceased with non-conventional means, for example, the clairs and or telepathy. Unfortunately, this description uses the word allegedly, which has a negative connotation. Research supports the idea that information obtained by mediums is verifiably accurate. In addition, research findings indicate that obtaining a reading with a medium can have a salutary effect on mourning. The word allegedly may discourage grievers from talking to therapists about any spirit communications they have had, including through mediums, personal spontaneous experiences, or other means. Similarly, the word allegedly may discourage therapists from taking such accounts seriously, no matter the sense of peace that such an after-death communication can offer clients. Allegedly may undermine clients' grieving process by making them feel their experiences are not real and might even be harmful. Therefore, substituting a different word for allegedly with something like seemingly, evidently, or better yet, are able to, should be done. We are not there yet in updating the definition of mediumship, but I do believe in a matter of short time we will be. Notably, this description states that mediumship has existed throughout history and across cultures. This clearly implies that mediumship is nothing new under the sun, and it is not simply going to go away because we moderns think we know better. In fact, mediumship has existed since at least antiquity first started recording events. For example, during the 5th century BCE, Greece, the oracles of Delphi were priestesses of the god Apollo. Kings and public men alike would call on them with questions pertaining to health, disease, war, politics, and family. Responses from Apollo came through the medium in the form of a riddle, after which a Delphic priest would interpret its meaning. Even the great Socrates received a message from the Delphic oracles, as was written by the ancient Athenian writer-historian Xenophon and told during Socrates' trial. Socrates resumed, "Hark ye, let me tell you something more, so that those of you who feel so inclined may have still greater disbelief in my being honored of heaven. Once on a time, when Xenophon made inquiry at the Delphic oracle concerning me, in the presence of many people, Apollo answered that no man was more free than I, or more just, or more prudent." Spiritualists are aware that the Bible is full of accounts of mediumship. For example, after King Samuel's passing, the prophet Saul could no longer consult him for advice before battling the Philistines. Even though Saul himself had outlawed mediums, in desperation, he ordered his servants to locate a medium in order to communicate with the late king. Under cover of darkness, Saul said to the medium, "Divine for me by a spirit, and bring for me whomever I shall name to you." Then the woman said, "Who shall I bring up for you?" He said, "Bring up Samuel for me." And she said, "An old man is coming up, and he is wrapped in a robe." And Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed with his face to the ground and did obeisance. In the New Testament, Mother Mary experienced the visitation of an angel who said, "The Holy Spirit will come to you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore, the Holy Child developing inside you will be called the Son of God." And, of course, we are all familiar with the miracles that Lord Christ performed, as, for example, changing water to wine, prophecies, healings, exorcisms, raising Lazarus from the dead, and communing with God. As to whether Christ's examples count as mediumship or something even greater, I will leave that to the listener to decide. From ancient times until even today, the Oglala Lakota performed the ceremony, "Yui little lights from nowhere," to communicate with the other worlds and to receive healing. The medicine man, Lame Deer, states, "Any large room can serve as a good place to hold a Yuwipi meeting, but some medicine men keep one permanently fixed up for this ceremony. As a start, one must remove all furniture and cover all windows and doors with blankets. Not the smallest flicker of light is allowed to penetrate from the outside, even though the ceremony always takes place at night. Even the faint glow of the moon would spoil the total blackness which we want." I say, does this not sound interestingly familiar to how modern seances are conducted? There are no lights, and there must be complete darkness. The description continues. "And among all these sounds, your ears catches the voices of the spirits, tiny voices, ghost-like, whispering to you from unseen lips. Lights are flitting through the room, almost touching, little flashes of lightning coming at you from the darkness." There are endless examples of mediumship throughout time and all over the planet. Ancient Egypt, medieval Europe, ancient and modern India, Japan, Africa, South America, etc. Mediumship is so prevalent that it has many names: trance, shaman, witch doctor, channeling, healer, medicine man, fortune teller, oracle, seer, soothsayer, savant, visionary, priest, prophet, saint, mystic, holy one, light worker, initiate, teacher, adept, juju, sorcerer, conjure woman, mage or magi, charmer, alternative practitioner, and master. And I'm sure the list is actually much longer than that. Now, during the second half of the 20th century, the term trance channeling became popular. The Parapsychological Association describes channeling as the claim that a departed spirit or other non-physical entity can speak or act through a sensitive person. In the late 1800s, this was called mediumship. Similar claims of communicating with departed spirits can be found throughout history and across most cultures. Excuse me. The term channeling became popular because some felt it necessary to distance themselves from the term mediumship. Prior to the popularization of the term channeling, there were some spiritualist camps that had been investigated for supposed fraud during physical mediumship demonstrations. Unfortunately, these cases were highly publicized, thereby giving mediumship an unfair and negative reputation. So, to regain credibility and popularity, the term trance channel became a popular replacement for medium. In addition, trance channels strictly excluded physical mediumship from their practices. Even today, the term channeling is still used. However, based on research articles, books, and online parapsychological conferences I have attended, the phrase medium is once again respectful. How could it not be? What with popular shows like the Long Island Medium, Hollywood Medium, and Crossing Over with John Edwards, all of which has helped to increase the public's awareness and acceptance of mediumship. And I'm not even mentioning the wonderful research in general in parapsychology. Speaking of parapsychology, during the last 15 years or so, there has been an increasing number of publications in peer-reviewed journals relating to mediumship. In addition, much of this information has been made available on the internet via YouTube, Facebook, published electronic and hard copy books. The list pertaining to this research is long. Now, I'm going to name a whole bunch of stuff, so get comfortable. 1, near-death experiences. 2, near-death experiences during comas. 3, end-of-life experiences. 4, researchers from the University of Virginia are studying reincarnation, especially in children who have not yet learned to read or write. 5, other research includes after-death communications, also called ADCs, as I mentioned earlier, including spontaneous ADCs, like meeting grandma in a dream or sensing her in the kitchen, induced ADCs through certain methods by certified psychotherapists where they actually induce an after-death communication during a therapy session, or assisted ADCs, and that's what the parapsychologists call ADCs when you work with a medium. Also, researchers are surveying different populations to analyze the frequencies of ADCs, and they're finding it's much more much more frequent than originally assumed. And let us not forget after-death experiences through the medically supervised use of psychoactive substances like LSD and ayahuasca. We have to consider those because they're legitimate means. But that's not all. Let's keep on going. We are on a roll. After-death communications through electronic voice phenomena, i.e. the sound recording of spirit messages on electronic devices. 9, instrumental trance communication, or ITC, which are visual communications or recordings of spirit on film, television, computers, etc. 10, the psychomantium, which is a completely darkened room with a comfortable chair to sit in, with a mirror standing a few feet in front of the chair. About 30% of people who sit in a psychomantium will experience an after-death communication after about sitting from 20 to 30 minutes. Also, there's brain imaging studies on mediums through EEGs, electroencephalograms, and functional MRIs. Now, I would be remiss if I did not mention that researchers are now looking at the importance of ADCs for people suffering grief and mourning. Researchers have found that ADCs, including seeing a medium, can have a profound healing effect for people who lost a loved one. Unfortunately, most clergy and psychotherapists are not trained to deal with ADCs. When talking to a clergy or therapist about having experienced an after-death communication, there is a real risk of being labeled as crazy, delusional, possessed, cohorting with demons, suffering from disassociation, ridiculed, patronized, disbelieved, prescribed psychiatric medication, and or even being sent to a psychiatric ward, and I know someone that happened to. Well, I'm happy to say there is a growing movement among the more enlightened psychotherapists to embrace ADCs by encouraging clients to talk about them, acknowledge its benefits, and to familiarize themselves with what mediums and others have to say about ADCs, etc. This same group of therapists understand that by working with a medium to connect with a belated loved one, a mourner will come to understand how the relationship has not been severed. Indeed, that the relationship with the loved one continues, albeit in a different way. This understanding offers comfort and peace to the client. It also demonstrates that life on earth continues to have purpose and meaning, while consciousness continues after the change called death for the one whose body has ceased. It is not that any one of the above studies alone provides the evidence for life after death. Rather, when the above evidence is taken together as a collective whole, there is much support for the concept of continuity of consciousness after the change called death. Instead of having to prove that there is indeed an afterlife, the tables are turning, and it is increasingly becoming the burden of skeptics to prove that there is no continuity of consciousness after so-called death. In other words, based on the above research, there is now more than enough evidence pointing to the fact that people's consciousness and personality do not stop when the physical body ceases. The unfortunate saying that when you're dead, that's it, is increasingly becoming a very misguided and outdated perspective on consciousness. In science, when interpreting data, the simplest explanation is always adopted. And today, the simplest explanation for the above phenomenon is that consciousness is not dependent on the brain or the physical body to exist. That consciousness is not a product of the brain, but rather it is the brain that is the product of consciousness. And this way we may confidently conclude that life continues regardless of the body's physical state. The implication of this new understanding is profound. The implication that consciousness does not require a physical body to exist threatens to completely upend the heavy value placed on the drive for power, money, sex, control, etc. Even atheists who claim not to believe in God must now admit that we are more than a statistically lucky chance happening of a mass of chemicals and atoms. Our world has changed radically since the beginnings of spiritualism in the 19th century. Indeed, the general population has a much more multidimensional and cosmic view of our existence. It is not so easy now for clergy, psychiatry, and misguided scientists to negatively influence people's perspective on mediumship. Therefore, it is no wonder that the word mediumship has become a household word. My late teacher Steve used to tell me that the main reason for mediumship is to demonstrate the continuity of life after the change called death. This is no small business, as it never fails to amaze me how many people still have not yet decided if indeed life continues after the body ceases. For far too long, Our culture has feared so-called death to the point that many people make life-altering decisions and act in ways on the premise that when you're dead, you're dead. This is, of course, short-sighted and will lead to needless pain and suffering. Consciousness is with us before we are born. It is with us while we are in a physical body and continues after our bodies stop functioning. Definitions of medium should reflect the fact that life continues even when the body does not. State it in ways that people can relate to. Say what is meant. Do not beat around the bush. Be clear and to the point. Don't be afraid to present mediumship as a normal and healthy part of being human. Point out that it has been around forever, all over the world, in most cultures, if not all. That death is as normal as is being born. These are the kind of understandings that are now being reflected in defining mediumship for the 21st century. It's about time. Thank you all for listening to my talk. Shanti and Amen.